Homo soloensis, discovered in Java Indonesia the 1930s, was once referred to as the Javanese Neandathaler. In the 1980s, anthropologists who wanted to dismiss Asian fossils as evolutionary dead ends lumped these fossils into Homo erectus because these fossils created a problem with the idea that modern humans recently evolved in Africa and only left some 50,000 years ago. There couldn't be any modern-looking fossils in Asia dating to only 50 to 100,000 years ago, according to the predominant model of human evolution. However, these skulls were always considered by their discoverers as a link between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, and were even classified as Homo sapiens soloensis at one time. Now we know of another human group, which we call the Denisovans, who lived in Asia and were closely related to the Neanderthals and modern humans. The original reports on the morphology of these fossils, untainted by the biases of 21st century paleoanthropology, provide a remarkable insight into human evolution. What happened to these ancient humans may also reveal a chilling event in ancient history, but one that should not be surprising given what we know about the history of modern man. You might be wondering, why does all this matter today? In 1996, the teeth of the Soloman fossils were dated using electron spin resonance dating and uranium-thorium isotope ratio mass spectrometry to 53.3 to 27,000 years ago. This would mean Solo man was contemporaneous with modern humans in Southeast Asia. Then, in 2008, gamma spectroscopy on 3 of the skulls showed they experienced uranium leaching, and the Solo man remains were redated to roughly 70 to 40,000 years ago. This would also make it possible Solo man was contemporaneous with modern humans. Then, in 2020, the first comprehensive chronology of the Ngandong site was published, which found the fossil bone bed was laid down 117 to 108,000 years ago. Researchers led by Professor Russell Chioshon of the University of Iowa opened up new excavations on the terraces beside the Solo River, reanalyzing the site and its surroundings. But the sediment layers that a fossil is buried in, especially near a river, can be much older than the fossil themselves. So, should we consider the dating of the teeth and skulls more accurate or the sediments which they were found? Ponder on that question for a moment. Solo man likely inhabited an open woodland environment much cooler than present-day Java, along with elephants, tigers, water buffalo, tapirs, and hippopotamuses, among other megafauna. They manufactured simple flakes and choppers, handheld stone tools, and spears or harpoons from bones, daggers from stingray stingers, as well as bolas or hammerstones from andesite. Professor Chioshon believes Solo man was too dependent on the open savanna and too inflexible to adapt to life in a rainforest. Homo sapiens is the only hominin species that lives in a tropical forest, he explained. I think it's mainly because of the cultural attributes of Homo sapiens, the ability to make all these specialized tools. Once this rainforest flora and fauna spread across Java, that's the end of Solo man, he said. But Chris Stringer of the British Museum sounded a note of caution of the new dates of 108,000 years ago. The authors claim that this is the last known occurrence of the species, and that this indicates there was no overlap with Homo sapiens in Java, as Homo sapiens arrived much later, he said. I'm not convinced about that, as other Solo man fossils from 2 other Javanese on the Solo River, known as Ngawi and Sambung Makan, remain to be properly dated, and they may be younger still. In his view, there is still potential for a chronological overlap, as there is nothing to indicate that the Ngandong individuals were the last of their species. When I asked Dr. Stringer about this quote in an email, he replied, "Unfortunately, work suggesting that the Sambung Makan fossils might be younger than those from Ngandong is still unpublished. So there is a strong possibility in his mind that all of these Solo man fossils dated to around 30 to 70,000 years ago, which is in contrast to the media narrative. In the media, these new dates were reported as representing the most recent known record of Homo erectus anywhere in the world. The only problem with these headlines is that they are completely false. Even a layperson can look at these skulls and conclude that these are no Homo erectus. This underlines the shift in thinking this field of study has undergone over the decades. We used to think of human evolution as a progression, with a straight line leading from apes to us. This is embodied in the so-called March of Progress illustration, where a stooping chimp-like creature gradually morphs into Homo sapiens, the apex of evolution. These days, we know things were far more complex. The latest discoveries highlight a mind-boggling truth: that many of the species we thought of as transitional stages in this onward march overlapped with each other, in some cases for hundreds of thousands of years. Indeed, when I first read Franz Weidenreich's book, The Morphology of Soloman, I was shocked by the descriptions of the fossils. These were no primitive Homo erectus. When Soloman discovered, Dr. Weidenreich noted that all of the 12 skulls had sustained damage, but it is undecided if this resulted from an assault, cannibalism, volcanic eruption, or the fossilization process. Volcaniclastic rock indicates deposition occurred soon after a volcanic eruption. Because of the sheer volume of fossils, humans and animals may have concentrated in great numbers in the valley upstream from the site due to the eruption. The ash would have poisoned the vegetation, or at least impeded its growth, leading to starvation and death among herbivores and humans, accumulating a mass of carcasses decomposing over several months. Indeed, some researchers think the collection of remains represent a mass death event, the result of a lahar upriver. A lahar, which comes from a Javanese word, is the slurry that can flow down the slope of a volcano when heavy rainfall occurs during or after a volcanic eruption. These violent events will sweep away anything in their path. According to these researchers, when the monsoon season came, lahars streaming from the volcano through the river channels swept Soloman downriver to the Ngandong site, where they and other debris created a jam because of the channel narrowing there. The fossils from Sambong Makan and Ngawi, also along the Solo River, were possibly deposited in the same event. However, two of the skulls present unquestionable evidence of violence to the individuals. The large injuries in a state of healing certainly appear to have resulted from the effect of violent blows, and the wielding of blunt weapons in an unsuccessful assault on these people. The fact that these two skulls belong to young individuals, perhaps females, lends some support to this idea. If this be so, the large cracks in most of the skulls and the breaking out of the skull bases may also be the result of successful attempts to slay the victims. We may never know whether they were attacked by people of their own kind or by more advanced human beings who would have given evidence of their superior culture by slaying their more primitive fellow men, Weidenreich wrote. 2 tibia were also recovered with the Solo skulls. Tibia A is robust and heavy, likely belonging to an adult male. Tibia B is powerful but slender and probably from a female. Estimating the stature of Soloman based on these tibia involves applying regression formulas derived from modern human populations. However, due to potential differences in body proportions between ancient hominins and contemporary humans, such estimates should be approached with caution. For the female Solo tibia, the estimated height would be approximately 160 centimeters, or around 5 feet 3 inches, with a body mass around 100 pounds, and the male around 170 centimeters, or 5 feet 7 inches and 150 pounds. This suggests that Soloman was of similar height to some Neanderthal individuals, though body proportions could have differed. This suggests a relatively lean build compared to Neanderthals, though differences in musculature and skeletal robustness could influence the actual body mass. The specimens at Ngandong appear to be comparable to examples of humans from Africa and elsewhere in Eurasia. So it appears that Soloman's tibia is notably more robust in the mid-shaft region compared to the average modern human tibia of similar length. What's more, Solo skull number 11 has a pituitary gland 150% the size of modern man, based on the larger size of the area of the skull where this gland is located in the brain. This suggests an increased testosterone level, which of course causes increased bone density as well as a more aggressive lifestyle. It has been written that man's forehead is the mirror of his intelligence, and Soloman is no exception. The estimated encephalization quotient for Soloman is approximately 7.90. This suggests a relatively high brain-to-body size ratio, comparable to some modern human populations, though body proportions and cognitive capabilities could have differed. The Solo skulls also bear a striking resemblance to some ancient Australian Aboriginal skulls, especially WLH50. dated to 30,000 years ago, though WLH50 had a much larger brain capacity of almost 1,600 cubic centimeters. Nyangong Skull 5 is one of the most impressive of the 12 skulls. Despite its solidity, this particular skull had also been smashed by a blow with a blunt instrument, perhaps a large wooden club. The back of the skull had been severely fractured, and a triangular fragment of the cranial wall, about 3 centimeters long, had been pressed approximately a half centimeter into the skull. The area around these fractures had been blackened during the fossilization process, probably by the action of manganese, while all other parts of the skull were dark brown. According to the archaeologists, our Javanese assistants, who prepared the skull, were firmly convinced that the black color was due to fossilized blood and could not be persuaded to the contrary. Unfortunately, on orders from higher up, the skull was taken apart and cleaned during preparation and put back together in its original shape, so that the figment of bone that had been knocked in is no longer recognizable as such. According to a report on the skulls by German and Dutch paleoanthropologists in the 1950s, a significant injury is observable on skull number 4. Almost the entire right parietal bone is occupied by a large scar. The superficial layer of the external bone is missing. The exposed surface consists of uneven islands of small irregular prominence, alternating with spots of smooth depressions. In addition, a band-like area extends along the entire lateral border of the injury. It is striated by narrow, parallel, transverse grooves, the report states. Since these structures extend without change along the entire length of the skull, the injury may possibly have extended to the missing region of the skull. Of special importance is the lateral margin of the injury. There is no evidence to indicate that the bone was perforated or that the injury affected the cerebral side, which is normal and has neither a depression, fracture, nor any other alteration. The most parsimonious explanation is that the owner of this skull was scalped and lived for long enough for his or her injury to begin to heal. According to the report, it is of no doubt that the change in the bone structure results from a lesion with its characteristic formation of newly built bony substance, such as are produced by any ulcer of a bone in a healing state. We can only speculate as to the cause of the inflammatory process, but the sharp incision bordering the lateral side of the scar suggests that the head was struck by a keen implement that cut away both the scalp and the superficial layer of the bone by a shearing movement from right to left, parallel to the bone scar. All these details suggest that the bone lesion was originally an inflamed wound. The smooth surrounding wall indicates that healing had begun at the time of death. In addition to this large injury, there are several smaller ones. One, a deep pit, forms an almost circular hole about 8 millimeters in diameter, but does not penetrate the bone. Another is on the base on the left side of the skull. This lesion perforates the bone. Skull number 6, possibly a young male, also has precisely the same type of injury. But why would these individuals have been scalped? Scalping is often associated with historical accounts in the Americas and Papua, but archaeological evidence shows that scalping also occurred in prehistoric Europe. Several sites across Europe dating from 4,000 to 7,000 years ago provide direct skeletal evidence of scalping. Furthermore, some of the scalped individuals in prehistoric Europe were women. The evidence from multiple sites suggests that scalping was not limited to male warriors or combatants, but also occurred in cases of massacres, ritual sacrifices, and possibly even social punishments. The presence of scalped women in mass graves suggests that they were deliberately targeted, possibly in an inter-community conflict, or as captives executed after a raid. While its exact purpose varied, scalping was likely used in warfare. Whether as trophy-taking, execution, or deliberate desecration of the dead, scalping appears to have been an established practice among early European societies as well as many other cultures. Scalping may have been a symbolic act of dominance over enemies, or a ritualized form of humiliation. Many of the victims showed blunt force trauma and execution-style injuries, suggesting organized raids or massacres just as in ancient Java. Indeed, the von Koenigswald report also interpreted skulls 4 and 6 as victims of an unsuccessful assault, and the other skulls where the base was broken out, the result of more successful attempts to slay the victims, presuming this was done by other humans to access and consume the brain. However, The anthropologist was unsure if this was done by a neighboring tribe, or what they termed more advanced human beings who would have given evidence of their superior culture by slaying their more primitive fellow man. In considering the causes of these injuries, we are confronted with the question posed by the absence of the skull bases, the facial bones, and the rest of the skeleton. Except for 2 tibiae, no other bone was found. This fact immediately excluded from consideration the possibility that entire bodies or isolated bones were deposited on the river terrace by floodwaters. Therefore, the bones must have been carried to the site where they were excavated by animals or men. Obviously, an animal would not select specific parts of the body or certain bones for such a transportation, so that method can be eliminated. But even if we admit that man himself established this cemetery, either intentionally or accidentally, we have not provided a reason for the discovery of only skulls lacking faces, or fragments of skulls, and only 2 tibiae. Peking man was found to have possessed one very human trait. He was a cannibal. All the skulls were smashed. The region round the occipital foramen was broken away in order to extract the brain, and there was even a femur that had been split lengthways to get at the marrow as seen in Java. According to von Koenigswald, in his book Meeting Prehistoric Man in All the Skulls But 2, the region of the foramen magnum is completely smashed, a phenomenon we have seen in Peking man. If we examine the skull trophies of modern headhunters, we find that here, too, the region of the foramen magnum is severely damaged. The headhunter is not content merely to possess the skull, but opens it and takes out the brain, which he eats in order by this means to acquire the wisdom and skill of the defeated foe. What we had found at Ngandong, therefore, were skull trophies, he wrote. The huge accumulation of animal bones suggested that we were dealing with a resting place of primitive men, strategically situated on a loop of the river. Here not only could they lie in wait for the animals that came to the river to drink, but they were also to some extent, though obviously not completely, safe from attacks by other members of their own race. From the strata of sand and gravel, we assumed that these primitive men camped here mainly in the dry season, and that the refuse they left behind was covered over with sand and gravel during the floods. The human skulls must have been left behind, either intentionally or unintentionally. In Meeting Prehistoric Man, von Koenigswald states that both ritual cannibalism and the practices of headhunters are rooted in magic and religion and are signs of man's spiritual awakening, even though their precise significance is hard to establish. There is an ancient general belief that there are secret powers situated in human skulls and bones, and these are often used by primitive people for ceremonial or magical purposes. Headhunting is a widespread custom. As can often be observed in certain ancient skulls, especially from Borneo and New Guinea, the base around the foramen magnum has been broken in order to remove the brain, which is then consumed in the belief that it will instill the powers of the former owner. The anthropologist concluded that perhaps the horde was taken by surprise and fled. Perhaps the skulls were put down to mark off the area. It seems that even today various tribes in New Guinea demarcate their dwelling or hunting grounds in a similar manner. They evidently suppose that the spirit dwelling in the skull can help them to defend a particular area against invaders. Thus, it is entirely possible that these fossils represent the outcome of an ancient war between modern man and primitive man. Western institutions, particularly those in the United States and England, control most funding for paleoanthropology. Research that aligned with the Out of Africa model has received preferential grants, publication opportunities, and institutional backing. The Leakey Foundation, National Geographic, and major universities focused on African and European sites, marginalizing Asian fossils. Peer-reviewed journals such as Nature and Science favor research supporting Out of Africa while rejecting or downplaying Asian fossils. With the rise of the Out of Africa theory in the 1980s, Asian fossils were reinterpreted as representing extinct branches of the human lineage, rather than direct ancestors of modern humans. This theory diminished the perceived significance of these findings in human evolutionary history. Asian fossils with modern or transitional traits have been classified as either failed evolutionary experiments, side branches that were later replaced, or early African migrants. This pattern of reinterpretation has helped maintain the Out of Africa model's dominance despite growing evidence of complex regional evolution. Western media often portrays Chinese paleoanthropology as ideologically driven, whereas Out of Africa was framed as purely objective, and Western anthropologists who advocated for interbreeding between modern humans and ancient humans were branded as being racially biased. Thus, the Out of Africa model has dominated not just because of scientific evidence, but also due to institutional control, funding biases, and narrative framing. Asian fossils were sidelined through academic journal gatekeeping, reinterpretation of evidence, and marginalization of key researchers. However, the discovery of Denisovans, interbreeding evidence, and recent fossil finds in Asia have forced a more nuanced discussion, with some researchers now advocating models incorporating elements of both regional continuity and Out of Africa.